just gotta do something to look real quick. I totally forgot that I needed to do this, but it shouldn't take more than 2 minutes. Okay. We should be good now. Looks like it's just you and me, VOD watchers. At least for now. I think y'all can hear me okay. I think I just ate a fly. Well, it's protein, I guess. It teaches me to clean my face with my tongue. And it's not like a horse fly, it's like one of them tiny flies. Well, I have regrets. But regrets are part of life. I associate this Bath and Body Works candle called Ocean Driftwood with Call of Cthulhu now because I had it open every time I played that game. I don't know if that was necessarily the greatest decision. It kind of smells like cologne. I'm gonna try something else. This is better. This one is from the list of fishing stories called Sea Trout and Standing Stones. I might have read it already. No, I didn't. Night fishing for sea trout can be an eerie experience at the best of times. Link that to the atmosphere and ancient history of the Scottish Islands, and you have all the ingredients for a classic ghost story. Loch Barb, on the island of South Uist, in the Outer Hebrides, off Scotland's west coast, is a supernatural place on the brightest of summer days, let alone as night draws in. The whole area is surrounded with relics of ancient history, such as the standing stones erected thousands of years ago, the local Stonehenge. But it is the Norse influence, beginning back in the Dark Ages, that lies behind this particular story. The Vikings sailed here from their Scandinavian homeland, made landfall and settled on the island. It must have been an attractive proposition more than a millennium ago, with the abundance of fish and freshwater lochs, and the sea to sustain the invaders throughout the year. South Uist still has some of the finest wild brown trout fishing in the world, especially among the limestone and the Kyr lochs, which produce such beautifully proportioned, fat, and healthy fish. This is the primary reason anglers from far afield visit the island, together with the sense of wilderness it evokes. The place has survived human interference since the Vikings held sway there. The sea trout on South Uist are famous as the brownies, and they will take the fly freely during daylight, both in estuaries and inland lochs. But in August, when this story unfurls, the best time to catch sea trout in fresh water is at dusk, with the glare leaving the water as the light fades away. And Loch Barb is just the place to be at twilight if you're an avid sea trout angler. At least, it is if you're a visitor to the island and don't know any better. This particular evening, a lone angler decided to leave the other members of his party after dinner at the Loch Boysdale Hotel and visit Barb. In an effort to keep his identity under wraps, we'll simply call him Peter. He waded into Barb from the east bank, the wind from his left side to help his casting, and the last of the dwindling light out in front. He told his friends afterwards that he'd been optimistic about the fishing because the weather was so good. It was balmy, with a southerly wind creating a slight ripple on the loch surface. He felt perfectly comfortable, even though he was wading up to his waist in the shallows, and he was at peace with the world as he began to fish. His optimism was rewarded, with a regular succession of small sea trout coming to his Bibio bob fly. What could be better or more tranquil than to be on Barb that night, enjoying classical sea trout fishing in the near-perfect conditions? He was concentrating so hard that he was only vaguely aware of the dwindling light turning into night. Even in August, the daylight is slow to fade out in the Outer Hebrides, lingering for longer than it does further south. Peter had no need to change his fly, so the darkness did not impede his fishing, and the wading was so easy close to the bank that there was no problem with not being able to see into the water. At first he knew that anything untoward was happening was when the temperature dropped dramatically, even though there was now plenty of cloud cover and the wind remained to the south. So, should have still been a warming influence. Peter was an experienced sea trout fisherman and knew instinctively that nothing meteorological should be causing the sudden change in conditions. Whether through this realization or some inner sense that something very strange was about to take place, he felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end, and a shiver of adrenaline dart down his spine. Peter looked up and across to the other side of the loch. In the darkness, in the middle of that wilderness surrounding Bark, there should have been nothing more than the silhouette of the landscape against the western sky. There certainly should have been nothing remotely linked to human activity, because he was certain that he was the only one after sea trout. There was nothing else for anyone to be doing there at that time. A line of flickering lights was moving slowly across the horizon. Peter said later that, although he was a very long way from what was happening, he immediately had the impression that people were walking very slowly, from left to right, each holding a torch to light the way. Not a modern torch with battery light, an old-fashioned one lit by flame. He also knew that because he was aware of the topography over there, the line of lights was headed in the direction of the standing stones. He had a vision of a line of figures, perhaps olden day monks in habits and cowls, walking toward that ancient site. Whether that was actually happening, he didn't know, but that's how his imagination saw it. The air was not only freezing now, but held an intense atmosphere that was closing in on Peter, with a blackness that was so much darker than the night around him. He stood there rooted to the spot, in rapidly increasing terror, the only thing visible to him now being the line of lights moving across the skyline. And then, a deeply unnerving feeling welled into his guts, that he was not welcome on Bark. The comfortable environment he had waded into at dusk had been blown away. Instead, as ridiculous as it seemed, out there in the middle of nowhere, he felt that he was intruding where he had no right or business to be, and he was being told by some unknown authority to leave immediately. Yo, Sassy, what's up? We are... Did I ever go live? No, I did go live. We are reading a spooky story about fish. Some dude went fishing in Scotland at dusk, and he was just having a grand old time catching some sea trout. But then evening turned to night, and it got super cold. And then it got super uncomfortable, and he thinks that on the horizon he sees people holding torches walking to the standing stones. And now he's creeped out. That's basically the TLDR. It's from the fishing book. Peter turned and fought his way through the water for the shore, tripping over boulders and slipping on gravel in his panic to get away from the place. Several times he fell to his knees, soaking the upper part of his body and bruising his legs, but the pain made no impression. Such was his manic determination to get away from the loch. He scrambled up the bank, dived into his car, and drove at a ludicrous speed all the way back to the hotel. Just got home, winding down. Story sounds good so far. Thank you, Sassy. Think of what you want me to read yet? His friends had been at the whiskey by the time he staggered into the bar, and there were a few other visiting anglers, and some of the locals with him. Despite the malty haze in his head, one of the party... Ooh, 4 Steam games. Nice. Despite the malty haze in his head, one of the party, he later related the story, said that one look at Peter was enough to realize something dreadful had happened. He was white as a ghost, and his hands were trembling uncontrollably. The fact that he hadn't taken off his waders before entering the bar, and that the top of his shirt was soaking wet, suggested he was in a high state of distress. Peter finally managed to string enough words together to give everyone an idea of what had happened on Barb. His friends mostly greeted the tale with alcohol-fueled ribaldry, but not so much the locals. One of the gillies thrust a large glass of whiskey into his hand. "Ah, drink that, Peter. I reckon you need it. You see, you don't stay out on Barb after dark. Everyone round here knows that." "Why?" The gilly shrugged. "It's just something you don't do." All the fishing stories, hell yeah. What'd you get on Steam? Who are those people out there? I take it they are people. The gilly nodded. "Yes, or at least we think they were once." "Ghosts? You think I've seen ghosts?" The gilly looked serious. "Let's just say I think you've seen something unearthly." The story has no definite ending, because no one ever dared go close enough to the standing stones to find out what goes on after dark there. The locals swear it has nothing to do with the living anyway. And Peter says that it was not so much the visual aspect of the incident, but the intense menace of the atmosphere out on the loch that scared him most. He was convinced that no living person could ever have conjured that up. And so, whether the torch carriers were ancient builders of the stones, pagan Norsemen, druids, or early Christian monks, no one can say. But what they will tell you on Southwest is that, as good as the sea trout fishing may be on Barb as the sun goes down, don't be stupid enough to be there. Alright. That's that story. It's a pretty good story. They tend to be. Let's see. Sorry, I'm looking for the next one. Here's one that's literally... Oh, I might need to do some censorship here. This one's called The Fisherman's Ghost. Oh wait, it's this story. Never mind, hold on. This is the wrong book entirely. Let's see here. It's always the damn fish stories. No, this particular book is a collection of southern ghost stories, and the compilers of the book were very faithful to the language that those people used. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but considering this is the Deep South, they use descriptors for people of color that would make people angry if I repeated. So I just have to be careful. Yeah, it's that kind of thing. We're not no more fish fuckers. At least not this time. Alright, but here's the Fisherman's Ghost. From Florida. Yeah, I just have to read ahead before I speak. I'm pretty sure this happened at the end of my father's senior year of high school or afterwards. He and one of his friends were out on a double date. They had 2 girls with him. His friend and his date were in the back seat of his car when he was in the front seat with his girlfriend sitting beside him. They was driving down a coastal road right along the coast. There was marsh grass on both sides of the road. Marsh grass gets 1.5 or 2 feet tall. And since then, they've put houses over there. It was fairly foggy. I don't think it was too dark. Anyway, they were driving at a pretty good speed, and there was a guy dressed in yellow. Like the old yellow slicker suits that you think of fishermen being in. He didn't have a hat or anything, but he was headless. And as soon as they passed him, they turned around as fast as they could and got back there, and he was gone. And there was nowhere for him to go. It was just marsh grass on both sides of the road. At the end of the road, there's like a little junior food store or something. It's a junior food store now, but it used to be like a corner food market or something. They told the attendant about the ghost, and he said it happens all the time. This happened in Oclatchee Bay, right on the end of Oclatchee River. It's a good-sized river. It runs all the way from Georgia down to Florida, and this is the Bay Area. All 4 of them in the car saw it. My dad said as soon as he saw it, he looked at his friend, and his friend was looking at him. It's just a man in slickers. It's a fishing community. I don't know if there's a story behind it or not. Well, if he doesn't want the Twitch band. No, I do not want the mariachi Twitch band to come after me. Permaban, and that's the end of Wolfie. Alright, Sassy, what can I do you for? What are you in the mood for? I can only stream for about like an hour or so more because I've got work in the morning. I have to be at work at 5:15, so I gotta be careful. But I've got Poe, I've got Lovecraft, I've got pretty much everything here. If there's anything in there. Oh, these are not. Let's see. I'm just gonna dig around. One from Ireland. I can do you for Ireland. Alright, let me see. Let's see here. This one is called... Oh, there's one literally called Sea Stories. I feel like that fits. By Lady Gregory. I was told by a man on the height near Dunconnor. It said there's everything in the sea the same as on land, and we know there's horses in it. This boy saw a horse one time out in the sea, a grey one, swimming about. And there were 3 men on the North Island caught a horse in their nets one night. And they were fishing for mackerel, but they let it go. They would have broken the boat to bits if they had brought it in. And anyhow, they thought it was best to leave it. One year at Kinvara, the people were missing their oats that was eaten in the fields, and they watched one night. And it was 5 or 6 of the seahorses they saw eating the oats. But they could not take him. They made off to the sea. And there was a man on the North Island fishing on the rocks one time, and a mermaid came up before him. It was partly like a fish and the rest like a woman. But he called her the name of God to be off, and she went and left him. That's rude. There was a boy who was sent over here one morning, early by a friend of mine, on the other side of the island, to bring over some cattle that were in a field he had here. It was before daylight. Then he came to the door crying. He said he'd heard 30 horses or more galloping on the roads there, where you'd think no horse could go. Surely those things are on the sea, as well as on land. My father was out fishing one night off Tyrone, and something came beside the boat that had eyes shining like candles. And then a wave came in, and a storm rose out for a moment, and whatever was in the wave, the weight of it, had like to sink the boat. And they saw it was a woman in the sea, and as she had the shining eyes. So my father went to the priest, and he bid him always to take a drop of holy water and a pinch of salt out in the boat with him, and nothing would harm him. The Galway Bay lobster seller said that they on the sea, as well as land, and their boats are often to be seen on the bay, selling boats and others. They look like our own, but when you come near them, they're gone in an instant. My mother one time thought she saw our own boat come into the pier where my father and 2 men on it. And she got the supper ready, but when she went down to the pier and called them, there was nothing there. And the boat didn't come until 2 hours later. There were 3 or 4 men went out one day to fish. It was a dead calm. But all of a sudden they heard a blast and they looked, and within about 3 miles of the boat they saw 12 men from the waist. The rest of them was underwater. They had sticks in their hands and they were striking one another. And where they were and the blast, it was rough but smooth and calm on each side. There's sort of a light on the sea sometimes. Some call it a jack-o'-lantern, and some say it's sent by them to mislead 'em. There's many of them out there in the sea, and they often pull the boats down. It's about 2 years since the 4 fishermen went out from Iran, 2 fathers and 2 sons, where they saw a big ship coming in and flying the flag of a pilot, and they thought she wanted to be brought in to the Galway. When they got near the ship, it faded away to nothing, and the boat turned over, and they all 4 were drowned. There were 2 brothers of my own, went to fish for the herons, and what they brought up was like the print of a cat, and it turned with the inside of the skin outside, and no hair. So they pulled up the nets and fished no more that day. There was one of them lying on the strand here. and some of the men of the village came down of a sudden and surprised him. And when he saw he was taken, he began a great crying. But they only lifted him down to the sea and put him back into it, just like a man they said he was. And the little way out there was just another just like him. When he saw that, they treated the one on shore so kindly, he bowed his head as if to thank him. Whatever's on the land, there's the same in the sea. And between the Isles of Arran, they can often see the horses galloping upon the bottom. It was a sort of big eel he used to be in Tully churchyard. He used to come and to root up the bodies, but I didn't hear of him of late. He may be done away with now. It was one Coran told me one night when he went down to the strand where he used to be watching for timber thrown up in the lake. And on the strand, on the dry sands, he saw a boat, a grand one with sails spread and all, and it up further than any tide had ever reached. And he saw a great many people round it, and it was all lighted up with lights. And he got afraid and went away. And 4 hours later, after sunrise, he went there again to look at it, and there was no sign of it, or of any fire, or of any other thing. The Marawara, the mermaid, was seen on the shore not long ago, combing out her hair. She had no fish's tail, but was like another woman. There's no luck if you meet a mermaid and you're out at sea, but storms will come or some ill will happen. There's a ship on its way to America, and a mermaid was seen following it, and the bad weather began to come. And the captain said, it must be some man in the ship she's following, and if we knew which one it was, we'd put him out of her and save ourselves. So they drew lots, and the lot fell on one man, and the captain was sorry for him, and said he'd give him a chance till tomorrow. And the next day she was following them still, and they drew lots again, and the lot fell on the same man. But the captain said he'd give him a third chance. But the third day the lot fell on him again. And when they were going to go throw him out, he said, "Let me alone for a while." He went to the end of the ship and he began to sing a song in Irish. And when he sang, the mermaid began to quiet and to rock as if she were asleep. And so he went on singing, till they came on to America. And just as they got to the land, the ship was thrown up into the air and came down on the water again. There's a man told me surely it was true. And there was a boy who saw a mermaid down by Spittal not long ago, but he saw her before she saw him, so she did him no harm. But if she'd seen him first, she'd have brought him away and drowned him. Sometimes a light will come on the sea before the boats guide them to the land. And my own brother told me one day he was out and a storm came all of a sudden, and the sail of the boat was let down as quick and as well as if 2 men were in it. Some neighbour or friend it must have been that did that for him. Those that go down to the sea after the tide going out to cut the weed often hear under the sand the sound of milk being churned. There's some didn't believe that till they heard it themselves. One night I went out on the boat with another man, and we saw a big ship near us, about 20 lights. She was as close to us as that rock, about 30 yards. We saw no one on board, and she was like some of the French ships that sometimes come to Galway. She went on near us for a while, Then she turned toward the shore, and then we knew that she was not a right ship. And she went straight on to land, and when she touched it, the lights went out and we saw her no more. It was a comrade of mine. He was out one night, and a ship came after him with lights, and she full of people. And as they drew near the land, he heard them shouting at him, and he got afraid. And he went down and got a coal of fire and threw it at the ship. In a moment it was gone. Holy crap, there's a whole bunch. There's a lot of these, holy crap. Okay. There are so many of these. I chose the one story that was just like a whole bunch of accounts of things. Okay. I'll continue. From the schoolmaster. A boy told me last night of two men that went with Potin to the island of Iran. And when they were on the shore, they saw a ship coming as if to land. And they said, we'll have a bottle ready for those that are coming. But when the ship came close to the land, it vanished. And presently they got their boat ready and put out to sea. And a sudden blast came and swept one of them off. And the other saw him come up again and put the oar across his breast for him to take hold of it. He would not take it, and said, I'm all right again now, and sank down again, and was never seen no more. From a little girl. One time, a woman followed a boat from Galway 20 miles out, and when they saw she was a bad thing, wanting some of them, they drowned her. Thank you, little girl. Yeah, this is just a whole collection of things. Let me try to find something a little bit more cohesive. Alright, give me a second. We're almost there. Alright. This is Tom Moore and the Seal Woman. Apropos of the following tale, I may say, the intermarriage with and descent of men from beings not human touches upon one of the most interesting and important points in primitive belief. Totemism among savage races in our day, descent from the gods in antiquity, are the best examples of this belief, derived from it in all probability, remotely. Okay, where does the story actually start? I'm not gonna preach about this. Okay, here we go. There's a tale in Scotland concerning people of the clan MacCondrum, who are seals in the daytime, but men and women at night. No man of the MacCondrums, it is said, would kill a seal. The MacCondrums are mentioned in Gaelic as Clan MacCondrum nan Ron, Clan MacCondrum of the Seals. In the village of Kilshannig, 2 miles northeast of Castle Gregory, there lived at one time a brave young man named Tom Moore, a good dancer and singer. 'Tis often he was heard singing among the cliffs and the fields at night. Tom's father and mother died when he was alone in the house. Tom's father and mother died, and he was alone in the house and in need of a wife. One morning early, when he was at work near the strand, he saw the finest woman ever seen in that part of the kingdom, sitting on a rock fast asleep. The tide was gone from the rocks then, and Tom was curious to know who she was, or what brought her. So he walked toward the rock. Wake up!" cried Tom to the woman. "If the tide comes, 'twill drown you." She raised her head and only laughed. Tom left her there, but as he was going, he turned every minute to look at the woman. When he came back, he caught the spade, but couldn't work. He had to look at the beautiful woman on the rock. No thunder, Kitty. At the last, the tide swept over the rock. He threw the spade down and away to the strand with him, but she slipped into the sea, and he saw no more of her that time. Tom spent the day cursing himself for not taking the woman from the rock, and it was God that sent her to him. He couldn't work out the day. He went home. He couldn't sleep a wink all that night. He was up the next morning early and went to the rock. The woman was there. He called her. No answer. He went up to the rock. "You may as well come home with me now," said Tom. Not a word from the woman. Tom took the hood from her head and said, "I'll have this." The moment he did that, she cried, "Give me my hood, Tom Moore." "Indeed I will not, for 'twas God that sent you to me, and now that you've speech, I'm well satisfied." And taking her by the arm, he led her to the house. The woman cooked breakfast, and they sat down together to eat it. "Now," said Tom, "in the name of God, you'll not go to the priest and get married, for the neighbours around here are very watchful while they're talking." So after breakfast, just like that. Okay. So after breakfast, they went to the priest, and Tom asked him to marry them. "Where did you get the wife?" asked the priest. Tom told the whole story. When the priest saw Tom was so anxious to marry, he charged about £5, and Tom paid the money. He took the wife home with him, and she was as good a woman as ever went to a man's house. She lived with Tom 7 years, and had 3 sons and 2 daughters. Wait, how the hell does that work? "7 years and you have 5 children? I mean, I guess. She had to be pregnant almost continuously unless there were twins involved. Anyway. One day Tom was plowing and some part of the plow rigging broke. He thought there were bolts in the loft at home, so he climbed up to get them. He threw down bags and ropes while he was looking for the bolts, and what should he throw down but the hood with which he took from his wife 7 years before. She saw it the moment it fell, picked it up and hid it. It's technically possible. Yeah, it is technically possible. It's just a lot. At that time, people heard a great deal. At that time, people heard a great seal roaring out in the sea. "Ah," said Tom's wife, "that's my brother looking for me. For 7 years?" Some men who were hunting killed 3 seals that day. All the women of the village ran down to the strand to look at the seals, and Tom's wife with others. She began to moan, and going up to the dead seal, she spoke some words to each and cried out, "Oh, the murder!" When they saw her crying, the men said, "I've nothing more to do with these seals." So they dug a great hole, and the 3 seals were put into it and covered. But some thought in the night, "This is a great shame to bury those seals, after all the trouble in taking them." These men went with shovels and dug up the earth, but found no trace of the seals. All this time, the big seal in the sea was roaring. Next day, when Tom was at work, his wife swept up the house, put everything in order, washed the children and combed their hair. Taking them one by one, she kissed each. She went next to the rock and, putting her hood on her head, gave a plunge. That moment the big seal rose and roared so that people 10 miles away could hear him. Tom's wife went away with the seal swimming in the sea. All the 5 children that she'd left had webs between their fingers and toes, halfway to the tips. The descendants of Tom Moore and the seal woman are living in Castle Gregory to this day, and the webs are not gone yet from their fingers and toes, though decreasing with each generation. A seal's roar? Yeah, like, you know how they do that oof, 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 oof? I guess if you do that loud enough, it's a roar. Alright. I've got time for 1 or 2 more. Learn something new. Yeah. I guess if you could call it learning. Oh, bird fact. Did you know that there's a small bird called the dipper that it's like, I think, the only songbird that actually goes fully underwater. It goes fully underwater, grabs some fish, and then comes back up and eats it. Kingfishers are not songbirds, but they also do full dives. Alright. This is another one from Ireland rather. This one's called the Enchanted Lake. In the west of Ireland there was a lake, and no doubt it is there still, in which many young men had been in various times drowned. What made the circumstance remarkable was that the bodies of the drowned persons were never found. People naturally wondered at this. And at length the lake came to have a bad reputation. Many dreadful stories were told about the lake. Some would affirm that on a dark night its waters appeared like fire. Others would speak of horrid forms which were seen to glide over it, and everyone agreed that a strange sulphurous smell issued out from it. There lived, not far distant from this lake, a young farmer named Roderick Keating. He was about to be married to one of the prettiest girls in that part of the country. On his return from Limerick, where he had been to purchase the wedding ring, he came up with 2 or 3 of his acquaintances who were standing on the shore. They began to joke with him about Peggy Honan. One said that young Delaney, his rival, had in his absence contrived to win the affection of his mistress. But Roderick's confidence in his intended bride was too great to be disturbed at this tale, and putting his hand in his pocket, he produced and held up, with a significant look, the wedding ring. As he was turning it between his forefinger and thumb, in token of triumph, somehow or other the ring fell from his hand and rolled into the lake. Roderick looked after it with the greatest of sorrow. It was not so much for its value, though it had cost him half a guinea, as for the ill luck of the thing, and the water was so deep that there was little chance of recovering it. His companions laughed at him, and he in vain endeavoured to tempt any of them by the offer of handsome reward to dive in after the ring. They were all as little inclined to venture as Roderick Keating himself, for the tales which they had heard when children were strongly impressed on their memories, and a superstitious dread filled the mind of each. "Must I then go back to Limerick and buy another ring?" exclaimed the young farmer. "Will not 10 times what the ring cost tempt any one of ye to venture after it?" It was within hearing a man who was considered to be a poor, crazy, half-witted fellow, but he was harmless as a child, and he used to go wandering up and down through the country from one place to another when he heard of so great a reward. Pageant, for that was his name, spoke out and said that if Roderick Keating would give him encouragement equal to what he'd offered the others, he was ready to venture after the ring into the lake, and Padin, all the while he spoke, looked as covetous after the sport as the money. "I'll take you at your word," said Keating. So Padin pulled off his coat, and without a single syllable more, down he plunged, head foremost, into the lake. The depth he went to no one can tell exactly, but he was going down through the water, until the water parted from him, and he came upon the dry land. The sky and the light and everything was there, just as it is here, and he saw fine pleasure grounds, an elegant avenue through them, and a grand house, with a power of steps going up to the door. When he recovered from his wonder at finding the land so dry and comfortable under the water, he looked about him, and what should he see but all the young men that were drowned, working away in the pleasure grounds as if nothing had ever happened to them. Some of them were mowing down the grass, and more were settling out the gravel walks and doing all manner of nice work, as neat and as clever as if they had never been drowned, and all were singing away with high glee. "She's as fair as the Capuchin, have you the courage her to win? And her wealth, it far outshines Cullen's bog and silver mines. She exceeds all heart can wish, not brawling like the Forish, but has the brightly flowing Lee, graceful, mild, and pure as she." Well, Padin could not but look at the young men, for knew some of them before they were lost in the lake. But he said nothing, though he thought a great deal more, for all that, like an oyster. No, not the wind of the word passed his lips. And so he went on toward the big house, bold enough as if he had seen nothing to speak of all the time, mightily wishing to know who the young woman could be that the young men were singing the song about. When he'd nearly reached the door of the great house, out walks from the kitchen a powerful fat woman, moving along like a beer barrel on 2 legs, with teeth as big as a horse's teeth. And she made toward him. "Good morrow, Padina," said she. "A good morrow, ma'am," said he. "What brought you here?" said she. "'Tis after Rory Keating's gold ring," said he. "I'm come." "Ah, here it is for you," said Paddy's fat friend, with a smile on her face that moved like a boiling gruel. "Thank you, ma'am," replied Padine, taking it from her. "I need not say the Lord increase you, for you're fat enough already. Will you tell me, if you please, am I to go back the same way I came?" "Ah, then did you not come to marry me?" cried the corpulent woman in a desperate fury. "Ah, just wait till I come back again, my darling," said Padine. "I'm to be paid for my message, and I must return with an answer, or else they'll wonder what has become of me." "Ah, never mind the money," said the fat woman. "If you marry me, you shall live forever, and today in that house, and want for nothing." Padine saw clearly that, having gotten possession of the ring, the fat woman had no power to retain him. So without minding anything she said, he kept moving and moving down the avenue, quite quietly, looking about him, for, to tell the truth, he had no particular inclination to marry a fat fairy. Fair. When he came to the gate, without ever saying goodbye, out he bolted, and into the water coming up all about him again. Up he plunged through it, and wonder enough there was when Padine was swimming away at the opposite side of the lake. But soon he made the shore, and told Roderick Keating and the other boys that were standing there looking at him all that had happened. Roderick paid him the 5 guineas for the ring on the spot, and Padine thought himself so rich with such a sum of money in his pocket that he did not go back to marry the fat lady with the fine house at the bottom of the lake, knowing she had plenty of young men to choose a husband from, if she pleased to be married. Damn, well done. I'll finish up with something from China, I think. Hold on, I'm looking for it. Okay, this one caught my attention. Ladies and gentlemen, I finished this off with The Tipsy Turtle. Holy shit, it's a little long, but I think we can fit it. At Lin Tao there lived a Mr. Feng, whose other name the person who told me the story could not remember. He belonged to a good family, though now somewhat falling into decay. Now a certain man who caught turtles owed him some money, for which he could not pay. But whenever he captured any turtles, he used to send one to Mr. Feng. One day he took him to an enormous creature with a white spot on his forehead. But Feng was so struck with something in its appearance that he let it go again. A little while afterwards, he was returning home from his son-in-law's, and had reached the banks of the river, when in the dusk of the evening he saw a drunken man came rolling along, attended by 2 or 3 servants. No sooner did he perceive Feng than he called out, "Who are you?" To which Feng replied that he was a traveler. "And haven't you got a name?" shouted out the drunken man in a rage. "That you must call yourself a traveler?" To this Feng made no reply, but tried to pass, whereupon he found himself seized by the sleeve and unable to move. His adversary smelt horribly of wine, and at last Feng asked him, saying, "And pray, who are you?" "Oh, I am the late magistrate of Nandu," answered he. "What do you want to know for?" "A nice disgrace to society you are, too," cried Feng. "However, I'm glad to hear that you are only a late magistrate. For if you'd been present, magistrate, there would have been bad times in store for travelers." This made the drunken man furious, and he was so proceeding to use violence when Feng cried out, "My name is so-and-so. I am not the man to stand with this sort of thing from anybody." No sooner had he uttered these words than the drunken man's rage was turned to joy, and falling on his knees before Feng, said, "My benefactor, pray excuse my rudeness." Then getting up, he told the servants to go on ahead and get something ready. Feng at first declining to go with him, but yielding upon being pressed. Taking his hand, the drunken man led him along a short distance until they reached a village, where there was a nice house and grounds, quite like the establishment of a person of position. And his friend, who was now getting sober, Feng inquired what might be his name. "Ah, don't be frightened when I tell you," said the other. "I am the 8th prince of the Qiao River. I have just been out to take wine with a friend, and somehow I got tipsy, hence my bad behavior toward you, which please forgive." Feng now knew that he was not of mortal flesh and blood, but seeing how kindly he himself was treated, he was not a bit afraid. A banquet followed with plenty of wine, of which the 8th prince drank so freely that Feng thought he would soon be worse than ever, and accordingly said he felt tipsy himself and asked to be allowed to go to bed. "Ah, never fear," answered the prince, who perceived Feng's thoughts. "Many drunkards will tell you that they cannot remember in the morning the extravagances of the previous night, but I tell you this is all nonsense, and that in 9 cases out of 10, those extravagances are committed wittingly with malice prepense. Now, though I am not of the same order of being as yourself, I should never venture to behave badly in your good presence, so pray do not leave me thus." Feng then sat down again and said to the prince, "Since you are aware of this, why not change your ways? Ah, said the prince. When I was a magistrate, I drank more than I do now. But I got into disgrace with the emperor and was banished here, since which time, 10 years or more, I've tried to reform. Yo smiles. Now, however, I'm drawing near the wood, and being unable to move around much, the old vice has come upon me again, and I have found it impossible to stop myself. But perhaps what you say may do me some good. While they were thus talking, the sound of a distant bell broke upon their ears, and the prince, getting up and seizing Feng's hand, said, "We cannot remain together any longer, but I will give you something by which I may impart requite your kindness to me. It must not be kept for any great length of time. When you have attained your wishes, then I will receive it back again." Thereupon he spat out of his mouth a tiny man, no more than an inch high, and scratching Feng's arm with his nails until Feng felt as if the skin was gone, he quickly laid the little man upon the spot. When he let go, the latter had already sunk into the skin, and nothing was to be seen but a cicatrix well healed over. Feng now asked what it all meant, but the prince only laughed and said, "It's time for you to go," and forthwith escorted him to the door. The prince here bade him adieu. When he looked around, the prince's village and house had disappeared altogether, leaving behind a great turtle, which waddled down into the water and disappeared likewise. He could now easily account for the prince's present to him, and from this moment his sight became intensely keen. He could see precious stones lying in the bowels of the earth. He was able to look down as far as hell itself. Besides which, he suddenly found he knew the names of many things, of which he'd never heard before. From below his own bedroom, he dug up many hundreds ounces of pure silver, upon which he lived comfortably. And once his house was for sale, he perceived that it lay concealed a vast quantity of gold, so he immediately bought it, and became so immensely rich in all kinds of valuables. He secured a mirror on the back of which was a phoenix surrounded by water and clouds, and the portraits of celebrated wives of the Emperor Shun, so beautifully executed that each hair of the head and the eyebrows could easily be counted. If any woman's face came upon the mirror, there it remained indelibly fixed, not to be rubbed out. If the same woman looked into the mirror again, dressed in a different dress, or if some other woman chanced to look in, then the former face would gradually fade away. Now, the third princess and Prince Su's family was very beautiful, and Feng, who had long heard of her fame, concealed himself upon the Kondong hill when he knew the princess was going there. He waited until she alighted from her chair, and then, getting the mirror full upon her, he walked off home. Laying it on the table, he saw therein a lovely girl in the act of raising her handkerchief, and with a sweet smile playing over her face. Her lips seemed about to move, and a twinkle was discernible in her eyes. Delighted with this picture, he put the mirror very carefully away. But in about a year, his wife had let the story leak out, and the prince, hearing it, threw Feng in prison, and took possession of the mirror. Feng was to be beheaded. However, he bribed one of the prince's ladies to tell his highness that if he would pardon him all the treasures of the earth, might easily become his. Whereas, on the other hand, his death could not possibly be of any advantage to the prince. The prince now thought of confiscating all his goods and banishing him. But the third princess observed that, as he had already seen her, were he to die 10 times over, it would not give her back her lost face, and that she had much better marry him. The prince The prince would not hear of this, whereupon his daughter shut herself up and refused all nourishment, at which the ladies of the palace were dreadfully alarmed, and reported it at once to the prince. Feng was accordingly liberated, and was to be informed of the determination of the princess, which however he declined to fall in with, saying that he was not going to thus sacrifice the wife of his days of poverty, and would rather die than carry out such an order. He added that if his highness would consent, he would purchase his liberty at the price of everything he had. The prince was exceedingly angry at this, and seized Feng again. Meanwhile, one of his concubines got Feng's wife into the palace, intending to poison her. Feng's wife, however, brought with her a beautiful present of a coral stand for a looking-glass, and was so agreeable in her conversation that the concubine took a great fancy to her, and presented her to the princess, who was equally pleased, and forthwith determined that they would both be Feng's wives. When Feng heard this plan, he said to his wife, "For the prince's daughter there can be no distinctions of first and second wife." But Miss Feng paid no heed to him, and immediately set off to the prince such an enormous quantity of valuables that it took 1,000 men to carry them, and the prince himself had never before heard of such treasures in his life. Feng was now liberated once more, and solemnized his marriage with the princess. One night, after this, he dreamt the 8th prince came to him, and asked him to return his former present, saying that to keep it too long would be injurious to his chances of life. Feng asked him to take a drink. The 8th prince said that he had forsworn wine, acting under Feng's advice, for 3 years. He then bit Feng's arm, and the latter woke up with the pain to find that the cicatrix on his arm was no longer there. Don't talk to sketchy turtles. In the meantime, though, do not eat or drink any questionable substances. Make smart decisions. Do not die. Dying is absolutely forbidden. I will see all of you wonderful people at a later time. Take care, guys. Will do, Sassy.